subscribe to my channel.
Have you ever heard a story so chilling it stayed with you for years? This is one of those stories, and it happened to my childhood friend. Honestly, just thinking about it makes my skin crawl, as if the memory refuses to let go of me. As the only person who knows the full truth, I've kept this secret to myself for years. My friend and I grew up together. His nickname was Ken. When Ken's dad was diagnosed with cancer, we were still in elementary school. During that time, I often saw his mom selling pancakes on the street. Ken would sit nearby, doing his homework. Once, I overheard his mom talking to a neighbor about how much debt they had because of Ken's dad's medical bills. Her sighs were heartbreaking. Not long after, Ken's dad passed away, leaving his mom to manage everything alone. A few months later, a man in his 50s started hanging around her pancake stall every day. He always bought something and often brought snacks or school supplies for Ken. "This guy seems nice," I naively told Ken back then. Ken didn't say anything. He just kept eating, his eyes fixed on the table as if lost in his own thoughts, refusing to meet my gaze. Later, I found out the man's name was John. He owned a small factory. Not long after, he married Ken's mom. On the surface, their life seemed to improve. John paid off their debts and even sent Ken to extra classes. But only I knew the truth. Despite the new clothes and extra classes, their smiles were strained, and their laughter sounded forced, like actors playing a happy family in a poorly written drama. One afternoon, I went to Ken's house to hang out. As I reached the door, I heard chaos inside. Peeking through the crack, I saw John, drunk, beating Ken with a belt. His mom tried to stop him, but got shoved to the ground. Her head hit the corner of the coffee table, and she started bleeding. This wasn't a one-time thing. Whenever John drank, he caused trouble. Once, he pressed Ken's mom's hand onto a hot stove, leaving a huge blister. Another time, he burned Ken's arm with a cigarette, leaving several round scars. The worst was when he locked Ken on the balcony overnight during a snowstorm. The next day, Ken had a high fever, but life went on as usual. His mom wore a mask to cover her injuries while selling pancakes, and Ken wore long sleeves to hide his bruises at school. This went on for 10 years. Ken became quieter but worked hard at school. In his final year, he got into a top university. "He finally made it," his mom said tearfully. I knew she wanted him to get away from this home. But Ken didn't leave. He chose a local university, saying he wanted to take care of his mom. Something felt off. His eyes had a strange intensity, like he was always on the verge of exploding. In his second year, right before the Lunar New Year, John died. The police said it was a combination of alcohol poisoning and a heart attack. It's a common occurrence in winter, but I'll never forget what I saw that night. It was the 28th of the last lunar month. Ken called me and said his mom had gone out to buy New Year's goods. He invited me over for dumplings. His voice was calm, and he mentioned John was drunk and asleep. I arrived around 7 p.m. Nobody answered the door, but it wasn't locked. Inside, the heat was on high, and there was a strong smell of alcohol. The TV was still on, and John was lying on the couch. At first, I thought he was just passed out drunk, but as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. His face was blue, his lips purple. He wasn't breathing. I called the police immediately. They said it was a typical case of drinking leading to a heart attack. According to them, drinking heavily in the cold can cause blood vessels to constrict, especially if the person already has heart problems. The autopsy confirmed it. His blood alcohol level was off the charts, and his arteries were severely blocked. A classic case of death by alcohol and heart failure. I had noticed changes in Ken since high school. He had developed a fascination with occult books and spent hours in the library's darkest corners. Sometimes, I'd see his notebooks filled with strange symbols. "What are you studying?" I once asked. "Just some old stuff I find interesting," he'd reply casually. Later I learned he wasn't just reading books. He was active on several online occult forums. From folk witchcraft to ancient spells, he read everything he could find. Once, while using his computer, I accidentally found a bookmarked dark web address. Back then, I didn't realize what it meant, and thought it was just another part of his odd interests. But the truth was far scarier. One drunken night, Ken confessed everything. Over the years, he had delved deeply into ancient occult practices and folk rituals. On a dark web forum, he met a mysterious mentor who taught him an ancient ritual. The ritual required gathering specific herbs at midnight and burning them with paper inscribed with strange runes. The smoke released a special scent. Ordinary people wouldn't notice, but it was deadly to those with a guilty conscience. It awakened their deepest fears, trapping them in endless nightmares. The visions would grow more terrifying until their heart couldn't take it anymore and stopped. That's how Ken killed John. The death looked like an ordinary heart attack caused by drinking. Whenever I think about this, I'm filled with guilt and confusion. I was Ken's best friend, yet I could only watch him suffer. Sometimes, I wake up at night, haunted by the image of John's lifeless body. The heavy smell of alcohol lingers in my mind, along with the memory of Ken's eerily calm expression. I chose to stay silent. It's a constant struggle. Part of me thinks John deserved it, but another part fears Ken has gone too far down a dark path. Now Ken works at a big company, and his mom no longer needs to sell pancakes. They live a quiet life, relying on each other. Sometimes I wonder if Ken hadn't suffered so much, or if John had been a decent stepfather, would things have turned out differently? But life is what it is. Once hatred is planted, it grows like weeds, uncontrollable and wild.